And there's been a widespread feeling among people on the right in the United States that they're being excluded from all of the major institutions of American life. That if people allow them to be part of big events, for example, if people allow them to be part of a marketplace, that is just because they're doing it at their own sufferance. The basic idea here is that you are so bad that you can maybe be allowed to participate in a sort of common space. But in reality, under the surface, people don't want you to be part of that common space. They want you out. And there are people on the left who say this is paranoid. No. We want you to be part of the common space. We may not like your opinions. We may disagree with you. But the reality is that we want you to be part of this big, broad conversation. And that has been the pitch of the so-called free speech left for a very long time. And the left is now dividing itself between liberals, people who believe in that concept, and the hardcore radical left, which is increasingly taking over institution after institution and then saying that people who disagree with us must be excluded entirely from those institutions. As you may know, this right here is the biggest political podcast in America, which means on planet Earth, this political podcast. Thank God, thanks to you, the listeners. We have millions of people who engage with this show every single day. And our podcast network at Daily Wire is the 6th biggest podcast network on planet Earth. And so when we decided that we were going to take a booth at a conference that, frankly, I'd never heard of called Podcast Movement, this was sort of a sign that we were just going to be part of the community of nations, so to speak. We were part of the podcasting community. We were reaching out to advertisers, reaching out to other podcasting networks, trying to find maybe new employees, or it's just like any other professional conference. So we spent a little bit of money. We got a podcast booth, and that was pretty much it, right? The event went on over the course of the weekend. There's this big podcast movement event in Dallas. It happens every year. It's been growing every year because the podcasting industry has been growing every single year. Well, I got a call from my business partner, Jeremy Boring, a few days ago, and he said, do you mind flying into Dallas for an event that is not really attached to Podcast Movement? Somebody's having a retirement party. Do you mind actually coming in for that to celebrate this person's retirement? I said, sure, no problem. So I flew in, and we happened to be at the Podcast Movement booth that we had paid for at Podcast Movement. And he said, let's just take a walk around the floor. Okay, that's literally all that happened. I came to this Podcast Movement event, this conference, and I walked around the floor. And this prompted such spasms of apoplexy, it beggars the mind. It really is an amazing thing. So I want to begin this story by showing you exactly what it was like when I was walking around Podcast Movement, because in order for you to understand the reaction from the left to my mere physical presence in this space, you have to understand just how intimidating I am. According to the left, I'm one of the most intimidating people on planet Earth. I'm absolutely terrifying. I am scary. I am threatening. I'm Darth Vader. Right? I am just, if I walk into a room, you don't know if I'm going to force choke you. You don't know that I'm going to strike you down with my lightsaber. You just don't know. I am a dangerous human being, according to the left. And you can see it on the video. Okay, this is video of me at Podcast Movement. Again, this is sort of a spontaneous drop-by because we paid for a booth. And, you want to check out the events, you just sort of walk around. This is all that happened at Podcast Movement. And then wait until you hear the reaction because it's astonishing. So here is the actual video.
Picture. 1, 2, 3. God bless you.
Hey, thank you.
I'm a scary dude. Nice suit, though.
Hey, good to meet you.
So, yep, that's me shaking some hands with some people who want to take some pictures. That's the whole thing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks for everything you do. Amazing so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm excited about it.
No, it's great. Thank you so much for coming. This is huge.
Of course. Thanks a lot.
That's the whole thing. So I literally walked around the floor, I shook some hands, and I walked out. This prompted Podcast Movement to issue a full-scale groveling apology for my presence. The reason being, there was a trans person who was in a 300-yard radius of where I was standing. And this person tweeted at Podcast Movement with their 150 followers and said, quote, as a trans person, as a queer person, as someone with a uterus, this does not make me feel welcome. This does not make me feel safe. Well, clearly I was making people feel unsafe by, standing there and taking pictures with people. I didn't even notice this human being. I couldn't have picked this person out of a crowd. I don't remember this person. Also, I'd like to note that if you have a uterus, this makes you a woman. In any case, Podcast Movement then put out a statement. And remember, we are the 6th biggest podcast publisher on planet Earth. My show is the biggest political podcast on planet Earth. Tens of millions of dollars from advertising agencies are earned every year from the show. And those people pay for Podcast Movement. So Podcast Movement put out the following tweet thread. And this is so indicative of where we are in politics today. It really is. And you want to know how you got Trump? You want to know how you got political polarization? You want to know how you got a bunch of people in this country who believe that they are being excised from the public square and are angry about it? You want to know? This is how. So Podcast Movement put out the following statement. It is amazing. Quote, "Hi, folks. We owe you an apology before sessions kick off for the day. Yesterday afternoon, Ben Shapiro briefly visited the PM22 Expo area near the Daily Wire booth. Though he was not registered or expected, we take full responsibility for the harm done by his presence." The harm done by my presence. I mean, it was amazing. And people were just keeling over. They had to actually triage the wounded at local hospitals. Just the damage done by my very presence. I mean, this is the sort of power I wield, by the way. My employees know this. I walk into a room, and it's basically like Moses coming down from the mountain when his face is shining. He has to put on a mask just to make sure that he doesn't hurt the people around him accidentally. That's me when I walk into a room, except with death and chaos. Podcast Movement then continued. There's no way around it. We agreed to sell the Daily Wire a first-time booth based on the company's large presence in podcasting. The weight of that decision is now painfully clear. Painfully clear. Shapiro is a co-founder. A drop-in, however unlikely, should have been considered a possibility. And then they continue along these lines. Just continues. Those of you who called this unacceptable are right. In 9 wonderful years growing and celebrating this medium, PM has made mistakes. The pain caused by this one will always stick with us forever on their deathbeds. The founders of PM are going to be thinking back about the pain that this caused to people who were literally just standing there in a general radius of my extraordinarily dangerous visage. I mean, I'm a dangerous man, gang. I was noting to Fabby, our makeup artist this morning, I'm not sure in modern American political history there's ever been a larger gap between the sort of rhetoric that is used about the dangers that I posed and the human being about whom this is spoken. Like, it really is an amazing thing. Look at me, for God's sake. What? Really? This is what you're so scared of? You pathetic mewling babies? Like, really? The pain caused by this one will always stick with us forever. Forever. I mean, literally shaking. Oh my, people just screaming, crying to the heavens. Why, God? Why would you allow this? We promise that sponsors will be more carefully considered moving forward, says Podcast Movement. They tweeted this out yesterday at 6:33 a.m. Just to clarify, no Daily Wire representatives were scheduled to appear on panels, and Shapiro remained in the common space and did not have a badge. If you have questions, we're here to talk. Thank you for reading. We hope you'll continue to join us from here on out. Well, I know you better have some crisis managers on hand. We need some psychologists. We need to make sure my mere presence. Okay, so I just want to point out right here that those of us who believe that men exist and women exist, we are accused because we believe that men exist and women exist, and that people who claim to be members of the opposite sex are not, in fact, members of the opposite sex. Because we say that, we are accused of things like erasure. You're saying that trans people don't exist. No, I'm saying people with gender dysphoria do exist. People with gender identity disorder do exist. I'm saying you are not a member of the opposite sex. That's what I'm saying. If you want to talk about, quote unquote, erasure, if you want to talk about the idea of denying people's right to exist, how about this person exists in a space, he needs to go away because his very presence threatens me? I'm not sure I've ever heard the questioning of someone's existence more clearly and obviously than that. This is a major podcasting event. Okay, every major podcasting company shows up to this, from Disney to Apple. Like, everyone shows up. Spotify, like, they're all there. We're the only ones who earn the ire of Podcast Movement to the extent that they put out a 4-tweet thread explaining how abjectly sorry they are for my physical being. Well, I'm not going to apologize for being a human who breathes oxygen in a space. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And the fact that the left, that many people on the left want that to happen is just pathetic. And listen, there are some people on the left who came out and they said, this is ridiculous. And some names sort of popped to mind here. Yashar Ali is not a person on the right. He is on Twitter saying this is ridiculous. Ryan Grimm over at The Intercept, he's on Twitter saying this is ridiculous. But I have a question. All these so-called free speech podcasting companies, the Spotifys and the Disneys, the crooked media company, where are you guys? Seriously, I have a question for you. Where are you guys? Because I know that on this show, I've said many, many times before that if you want to know the truth about what is fact and what is opinion in politics, and you're listening to podcasts, what you should do is you should listen to shows like this one, and then you should listen to Pod Save America, which is a crooked podcast, and then what you should do is you should see what is the common basis of fact, the stuff that we're saying that's the same. That's the fact. Everything else is the opinion. I've recommended that you listen to shows on the other side. People on the other side of the aisle, for all of their talk about tolerance and diversity and free speech, if they are not willing to stand up and say that conferences should include the most mainstream representative of the podcast right, this show has well in excess of 35 million listeners a month. Well in excess of it. If you are not willing to say that sort of stuff clearly and openly, then why exactly would I trust that you want to be part of the political discourse rather than just to monopolize and dominate? It's disgusting. Your silence is rather deafening here. Because let's be real about this. If you were banned from podcast movement, I would say something. I have. I've spent my life saying things about this. But all right, I mean, if this is the way you want it, this is the way you want it. If you want parallel economies, if you want parallel podcasting universes, if you want parallel advertising, if that's what you want, that is what you're going to get. And you're going to get it right in the face. The left is cruising for a bruising, and they are asking for it. And when it comes, listen, we launched Jeremy's Razors on the basis that Harry's Razors pulled their advertising and ripped into our listeners. And we made a lot of money off of Jeremy's Razors. That company has been in existence for like a few months, and that company has almost 100,000 subscribers to it. We are willing to do this to all of you, because if you wish to excise us, if you wish to cast us out into the cornfield, we're not all just going away. Half the country isn't just going away. Our mere presence threatening you, we're not just leaving. We're not just going to surrender the playing field to all of you. So keep going. Seriously, do it. Dare us. Continue. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.